A shadow in the middle of the lane. Night descended on suburban Pennsylvania like a heavy blanket, soaked in the chill of early winter. Along the silent forest road, mist crept up from the valley onto the ground, as if nameless wandering spirits. Leafless trees, dark and bare, stood like guardians on either side of the road, their thin forms resembling fairy tale apparitions. The sky hung low with gray clouds. Wind whistled through the dry leaves, echoing eerie sounds of untold secrets. An ambulance surged through the fog, its red lights flashing, slicing the darkness like pounding heartbeats. The siren's wail echoed through the valley, heralding a life or death race. Inside, the heart rate monitor marked each heartbeat, and life in the rear compartment hung by a slender, fragile thread. Emily, the 58-year-old ambulance driver, with a weathered face and eyes as still as a winter lake, gripped the steering wheel. She was used to sleepless nights and unexpected emergencies, but tonight, something made her uneasy, a faint, creeping feeling under her skin, as if someone was watching her from the darkness in the forest. And then, it appeared, right in the middle of the winding lane, where the fog was thickest and the wind howled like a voice. A solitary figure stood before the vehicle. Startled, Emily slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched harshly on the icy asphalt. The vehicle slid forward slightly before coming to a full stop. It was a large doe, tall, slender, and soaked with mist. Its gray-brown fur glistened under the headlights, edged with a thin layer of snow falling sparsely from above. It did not move. There was no panic, no instinctive leap away as a deer might show when encountering a human. It simply stood there, straight-backed, head raised, like a living statue in the depths of the forest. Emily held her breath, her hands gripped the wheel tightly, mentally cursing the obstruction on an emergency night. But when she looked into the animal's eyes, her discomfort froze. Those eyes, they were not the frightened gaze of a wild animal, nor did they carry the naive, timid look often seen. Instead, they held something strange, profound, sorrowful, and, as if containing something beyond mere survival instinct, they looked straight at her. No, not at her, but at the rear of the vehicle. That gaze pierced through the glass, through the fog, through time itself, placing an unspoken question into the heart of the person who met it. Emily's throat tightened, as if someone had touched a memory she never knew she harbored. She glanced through the rearview mirror, into the back compartment where an unconscious boy, about 8 years old, lay. His body was wrapped in bandages, his complexion pale as early snow. The heart rate monitor still pulsed regularly, though weakly. At that moment, the doe took a step, slowly, but with determination, approaching the front of the vehicle. Its eyes remained fixed on the rear compartment, as if it already knew who lay in there. And in that instant, Emily's hand began to tremble, not from the cold, but from a nameless fear, a fear that only arises when one stands before something the rational mind cannot explain. She turned on the high beams, and the siren blared again, reverberating through the forest. But the doe did not budge. Its neck lifted, its slender body stood still as though waiting. The wind whipped its ears, yet it did not flinch. Emily felt herself being swallowed by a silence not of this world. Then suddenly, a question arose in her mind, an inner voice from deep within. Why is it standing in the middle of the road at this moment? And why did its gaze make me cry when I looked at the back of the truck? No answer came, only the fog continued to crawl across the road. Snow fell harder, and that gaze imprinted itself on her memory like an indelible trace. It had not come by chance. No, something, an invisible undercurrent, had brought it here, in that moment, when a deer's eyes pierced through space and touched the soul of a human driver. Had begun a journey Emily had never imagined, a journey not just to save a life, but to awaken slumbering memories, and unlock a doorway to things strange, sacred, and beyond any human language. Bloodstains on its back. Emily opened the vehicle door. Cold air flooded the cab like an invisible torrent, carrying damp, decaying scents of forest leaves and pine needles, along with a peculiar shiver that crept down her spine. She stepped down slowly, her boots heavy as they pressed into the thin, beginning to freeze layer of snow on the road. The headlights shone directly on the doe. It remained motionless, as if guarding something behind it. "Go on," she muttered. Taking another step, her arm sweeping slightly as if to wave away a stranger. But the animal did not back away. Instead, it tilted its head, just slightly, in what felt like a polite gesture, then partly turned, revealing its left shoulder. Emily froze. Something was wrong. She narrowed her eyes. Beneath the fine gray-brown fur, a dried blood stain stretched from shoulder to flank. The further was matted and clumped, as if the doe had just endured a battle for survival. Old and new scratch marks twisted across it like ancient runes. Her heart pounded. Blood on a deer in the middle of winter? Step by step, Emily moved closer, her hand instinctively reaching for a flashlight at her hip. Then she stopped abruptly. Something glinted on the doe's antlers. A small piece of pale blue cloth swayed in the wind. Not a leaf, nor a vine. She tilted her head to look more closely. It was a small piece of cotton fabric, frayed, hem-worn, with a red dinosaur printed on it. A kid's blanket fragment. Emily's throat went dry. Her gaze flicked back, toward the ambulance's open rear door. Inside, the boy lay motionless. No stirring, no sound, only the life support monitor blinking faintly in the darkness. The doe stood silently watching her, and then, for the first time, it moved slightly. One step, then another. Though not running, it stepped aside and settled at the roadside, as if clearing a path. And that gaze, once again, was not directed at her, but fixed on the open back of the ambulance. Emily felt her heart contract. Within that stillness, this was not wildness, but a call, soft, but enough to disorient. She turned back and opened the rear door, peering inside at the child. Gaunt face, cracked lips, small hand loosely gripping the med blanket. The child had no identification. Discovered by a passerby near the riverside. Nobody knew who the child was or where they came from, only that they needed to survive, and Emily was taking them to the nearest hospital. But now, things were no longer that simple. She stepped back to the front of the vehicle. The doe stayed in place. Its eyes gleamed, not like a mere animal. It seemed to bear a fragment of a soul, as though what it looked at had once been human. Emily swallowed hard, her voice hoarse. This fabric, is it his? Of course. The deer said nothing, but something deep in her chest had already answered. Her rescuing instinct told her this was a normal night, an emergency, a wild animal, a roadside accident, but her heart knew, felt, that every coincidence was converging on one point. That doe was not just a deer. It was trying to say something. But what? Emily realized she was lost within her own questions. She slowly withdrew her phone, intending to call dispatch to delay the run due to obstruction, but her hands trembled. The numbers appeared faint and blurred through her breath's mist. The doe turned its head, gazing into the forest, a slow, decisive gesture, then looked back at her, as if inviting, or warning. Emily did not know. All she knew was that from the moment those eyes met hers, something inside her had changed. She was no longer just the ambulance driver on a mission, but a woman drawn into a story the rational mind could not touch. Tracks in the snow. The second night, fog laid thick over the familiar road, like a cold velvet blanket wrapped around every tree trunk and every patch of earth. Emily drove the ambulance with her mind stretched tight like an overwound strain. The vision from the night before, the deer's eyes, the dried blood, the pale blue fabric, haunted her. She wondered whether stress from too many tough emergency calls was getting to her. But when she looked into the rear compartment, at the small shape of the child lying unconscious, her heart knew she wasn't mistaken. Something very real was happening, something beyond reason. Just as the night before, on that winding, treacherous road, the deer appeared again, this time not in the middle of the road, but at the roadside, standing in a thin new layer of snow. It stood motionless, back toward her, as if awaiting the moment she turned her head. Emily pressed the accelerator, but her body trembled, refusing to move forward. The deer's shadow on the snow made her feel as though she stood before a symbol of brokenness, of challenge. In something sacred, she stopped the vehicle not far away, opened the rear door, as though to confirm that it was real. She backed away, stepping slowly, no sirens, no blaring lights. One step, two steps. The snow compressed underfoot. With each step she took, the fog parted a little more, revealing the creature more clearly. That same gaunt body with lightly branched antlers. the dried blood and the pale blue fabric swaying. But this time, next to it, there were footprints, not just the deer's, but also those of a human, a child. 2 sets of prints, one from the deer's hooves, another small footprint deeply pressed in the damp snow. It was unmistakable. Emily felt a small exclamation rise in her heart. These tracks lead into the forest. Her lips trembled, but her eyes shone like a spark. This was no longer an obstruction. It was the path. She tried to step back, intending to call her colleagues for backup, but in a fleeting instant, it seemed some voice whispered, "Follow." Her heart hung suspended between choices: continue the rescue mission to the hospital, or plunge into the deep woods where mysteries awaited. Emily knew that going in meant risking time, risking the child's life, but she also asked herself, if she didn't go after them, would she regret it for the rest of her life? She stepped into the forest. Following the tracks, snow fell silently, without sound, the scent of pine dampness, the taste of cold forest air. The beam of her flashlight cut across like 2 eyes probing the void. At times she thought she was drifting into a dream, but each footprint under the flickering light reminded her, this is reality. Raw and threatening, Emily felt her heartbeat pound. Every step was an internal battle. Fear, but a compelling pull. Fear, but unstoppable curiosity. After a few hundred meters, the footprints vanished suddenly. No human prints, no hoof prints, just smooth snow. Emily stopped, looked up. Around her, dense trees seemed to guard centuries of secrets. Fog curled around every nook. She pressed her lips together and edged forward, probing by instinct. Suddenly, she saw something half buried in the snow. It was a child's shoe. Tiny, canvas, faded, stuck with a patch of red mud like broken brick. Emily's heart skipped. She bent down, picked it up. Her fingers trembled as they touched the worn sole. Inside the soft fabric was a tiny footprint of a child. A dry grief gripped her throat. She swallowed hard. Her throat felt like bristled with thorns. This was exactly what had tormented her. Why was the piece of children's fabric stuck on the deer's antler? And now, this shoe seemed to say, "We were here, we walked, and did not return." She slipped the shoe into her warm coat pocket. The flashlight beam glinted on another object under a nearby tree. She gently brushed away the snow and lifted it. It was an old photograph. Standing upright, a family. The father wore a white shirt. The mother smiled kindly. The child grinned brightly with a hand resting on the father's shoulder. The photo was torn at one corner. Part of the child's face was missing. Emily felt pain as though a memory had been torn apart by accident. For a moment, the mother's gaze in the faded photo seemed to wave at her. Feigned but striving, the father appeared frozen in silence. Emily pressed the photo tight against her chest. A tear broke free and fell onto the snow. A small, cold drop. Who are they? The child's mother? The father who is gone? Her voice choked. She knew then that she was touching a reality she should not touch. A pain that should not be revealed. On the other side, the deer appeared again. It stood still, emerging from among dense trees, its eyes still heavy with sorrow. But this time, its gaze did not just rest on Emily. It encompassed the photograph she held. As though recognizing, as though trusting, as though confirming, Emily raised her head. Words could not express it, but in that moment, she understood. The deer had led her to where the photograph was buried in the snow. Led her to the shoe, led her to a painful truth. And from that moment, she could not step back. Emily's heart ached. She looked up at the dull sky through the branches. It was all right. Light rain might be coming, but she knew she stood in a moment of significance. A trace once buried, not just in snow, but in memory, in conscience, and now in her duty. "We will find the truth," she whispered, then gently placed the child's image, the photograph, beneath the tree. Then she turned and looked back at the deer. It stood silently, then slowly stepped back into the darkness, leaving the flashlight's beam like a gentle ghost from memory, but also gently lending her strength. Go forward, regardless of the catastrophe or the invisible wounds ahead. Emily bowed her head, looked at the footprints that had guided her here. Then she quietly stepped toward the ambulance, her chest heaving with fog and unanswered questions. The long night ahead would be more than just a path back to the hospital. It would be the journey to uncover the source of that silent calling. The ghost of memory. It was the fourth night since the ambulance left the scene, and Emily could not sleep. Images of the little shoe, the old photograph, the dried blood stain, and the deer's sorrowful gaze swirled in her mind. Every scream of wind through the branches outside, every tick of the clock in the station room, seemed to pull her deeper into a dream that reason could not judge. Dusk had just faded as cold mist began forming on the road. Emily sat back in the driver's seat and started the engine, and everything felt inevitable. This was no longer just an emergency call. It was a search for truth. She drove to the final location, the place where the deer had appeared, where the tracks vanished on the forest's edge the night before. Darkness remained dense, her headlights sliced through columns of silver fog. The forest road was watery and the snow turning soft. Blobs of shapeless ice clung to the tires. Emily felt like she was dancing on a fragile line between past and present. She stepped out. The wind was sharp like a knife, but something burned within her. She switched on her flashlight and scanned among the underbrush and decaying leaves. The footprints seemed to wait ahead. As she ventured deeper, the snow thickened, fog became heavier, the light flickered, dry twigs snapped beneath her. She stopped when she remotely glimpsed something, an old car buried beneath snow and moss. Paint was faded, windshield shattered, side door off its hinges. It looked like a body refusing to yield to time. She approached and raised the flashlight. Inside the vehicle, though almost full of snow, the silhouettes of two figures remained visible, a woman and a little boy. The mother's arms wrapped around her child as if to never let go. Emily's heart froze. The light from her beam danced across the rusted frame, over the thin layer of ice on fabric, clarifying the poignantly expressive shapes that snow had tried to conceal. The scent of decay from the vehicle, damp and smoky cold, all merged into the fragrance of buried memory. Emily stood still. Time seemed to stop. This was not merely an accident, not merely a forgotten story, but a tragic drama locked in darkness. She whispered softly to the quiet core of her soul, "The child, it's him." And suddenly, she realized a horrifying truth. The child lying unconscious in her ambulance was the very same child. The child who had once perished in that buried car 5 years earlier. Now somehow present in this moment, and it was the spirit, or the deer, that had led her to this silent grave of the child. Overcome, Emily pressed her palm to her chest and tears began streaming. Why her? Why had this spirit chosen her among countless people? She cried out like a delirium. "Can you hear me? You saved him." But the mother, she couldn't stay with him. She dropped to her knees and, trembling, opened the ambulance door. In the dim glow of her flashlight, she looked inside, the mother's and child's bodies. The mother still cradled her child, as if protecting him in eternally restful sleep. Every bone line, every stray hair, every torn bandage, each evoked nameless sorrow. Unable to help herself, Emily bit her lip to keep from screaming. "Forgive me, mother. Please forgive me." Steeling herself, she picked up her phone and dialed emergency services. Her words stumbled out in urgent haste. "This is Emily. Ambulance 07. I've discovered a car buried in the snow. Inside, there are the bodies of a woman and a child." Her chest tightened as the final words escaped. "Please, come quickly." At the same time, a frantic voice crackled from her earpiece. "We're on our way. Stay where you are, and guard the scene." Emily bowed her head. Snow began drifting onto her shoulders. She felt a warmth, not of winter, but of truth touching her heart. Her actions, guided by intuition, by the deer, had brought a soul back to its final resting place and liberated a fragment of memory swallowed by time. Emily's heart stirred, achingly, but proud and relieved. She rose, taking one last look at the opened ambulance door, at the mother's hand still clasping her child, at the dried blood on the deer's antlers. Like a sacred bridge between the living and the departed, the distant sound of a helicopter echoed through the cold air, heralding the arrival of rescue teams. In the faint light from emergency vehicles, Emily's silhouette appeared, lifting the child's shoe and the torn photograph, two relics unearthed from oblivion, pressing them to her chest like a vow. The journey had reached its destination, but the story continued, not just within her, not just in the hospital, not just in the community, but in the child, who, when grown, might one day know he was that child, and there was a deer. And a woman, Emily, who refused to let the truth remain forever buried in snow and silence. The final gaze. Dawn crept up from behind the hills of Pennsylvania, filtering through thin clouds and pine forests soaked in mist. The snow had stopped falling, but the air remained thick with a cold that seeped into the skin. Not just from the weather, but from the lingering sense of what had been unearthed in the night. Emily sat alone on a large rock at the forest's edge, where the dirt road led to the now sealed scene. She had stayed behind after the investigation team took the woman's and child's bodies to the forensic center. The ambulance now sat empty. The boy, the unnamed patient, was still alive, still fighting for his life in a hospital more than 30 miles away, or about 48 kilometers. But Emily knew a vital part of his soul had already found its way home. The wind swept gently through the treetops. Like a soft touch, she looked up. The deer was there. No sound, no footsteps. It was simply there, as if it had never left. It stood at the forest's edge, where the first sunlight had just reached the untouched snow. Its tall frame was not threatening, its antlers etched against the sky like an ancient symbol. Its fur was speckled with snow and mud, and on it, the dried blood had faded. Now only a faint trace like memory. The blue fabric was gone. It had either fallen somewhere, or completed its purpose. The deer looked straight at Emily. No words, no movement, just one look. The final gaze. No more panic, no more pleading. It was a farewell. In that moment, Emily felt herself slip outside of time. All sound faded. It was just her, the deer, and the silent space between two worlds. She slowly stood, barely breathing. A feeling rose inside her. Impossible to name. Not fear, not sorrow, but deep reverence, as though standing before a higher spirit, as though someone had given her a mission she never knew she had carried in her heart. She nodded gently, and as if understanding, the deer turned away, not in haste, not in retreat. It stepped calmly into the forest, each step light as wind. The snow beneath its feet did not crack, only held small impressions. Emily watched until it vanished into the misty trees, its form melting into the woods, as if it had never existed, as if it were only a dream, but a dream that left a permanent mark on the heart of the one who woke. She turned back, slowly walking toward the ambulance. In her coat pocket still sat the child's shoe and the torn photograph. Feigned evidence of a story not everyone would believe, but Emily did not need anyone to believe her, because she had seen it, and more importantly, she had felt it. Something inside her had been released, an emptiness she had never known existed, now filled, not by explanations, but by presence, by a gaze. That final gaze, not just from the deer, but from the mother who held her child in eternal sleep, from the souls not yet at peace, still strong enough to stir the heart of an ordinary human. In the distant snow, Emily saw the deer's tracks trailing into the forest, fading with the breeze. The wind whispered, the snow began to melt, and in that moment, she knew she had been chosen, not because she was special, but because her heart had been willing to listen. The soul in the night. The story of the deer standing in the road never made the news or television. But those who were there, from the rescue team, the nurses, to the police, all knew they had witnessed something beyond human logic. Emily never told much. When asked, she would just smile wearily and say, "I only did what felt right." Yet ever since that night, whenever her shift took her through the forest road, Emily always slowed down, not out of fear of hitting wild animals, but because deep down, she still hoped to see that gaze again, that quiet look that had once pierced through the fog and led her into memory. That deer, whether real or a manifestation of something more sacred, had fulfilled its purpose. No words, no path, it had only stood there, at the right time, in the right place, with a gaze that held something even language could not carry. Emily, a woman long accustomed to sirens and medical emergencies, had for the first time encountered something no medicine could heal: silent loss. She kept the child's shoe and the torn photo by her desk, as a silent reminder that not everything must be understood, but everything deserves to be heard. The child who had been saved that year might grow up without remembering anything, but perhaps, someday, standing before a wild animal, he might feel a tug in his heart, as if someone once led him out of the dark. Because sometimes, messages do not come from people, they come from the quietest places, the places no one expects. When the heart learns to listen, there will be voices from places we never imagined, sometimes from the eyes of a creature that seemed silent. And at last, when Emily stepped out of the forest and looked toward where the deer had vanished, the snow had gently covered all traces, except one. In her heart, the mark remained forever.